Crease's Corner. I am Jimmy the Crease, and this episode is The Mafia Boss and the Bank Robber. It's about my time with Columbo family boss Carmine Persico. I was a convicted bank robber. I did over 20 years in federal prison. People always ask me, what is a successful bank robbery? I consider a successful robbery if you actually make it out of the bank with all the money and if you're able to spend some of it. So I successfully robbed 3 banks of over $500,000, which is kind of unheard of for a single person, but that's what I was stupid enough to do. So I started my sentence in 2003 at the FMC in Butner, North Carolina. I had a job as a inmate companion, and I worked on the psych wings. Got a lot of stories to tell about that, but that's in the future. After about a year and a half, I just got tired of being there, and I wanted to go to a real prison. So they shipped me next door to the FCI, which was a medium. They have a low security there. They have a camp. They had the hospital. And while I was there, they started building the FCI 2. But at the time, it was a medium. Housed a lot of famous inmates. It was almost like a college campus, how it was laid out. Few problems is when you went to R&D, when you first got there, the captain comes in and says, okay, we got to tell you, we have a sex offender program here. They live in their own unit. If you bother any of them, if you do anything, you'll be charged with a hate crime, and we will ship your ass as far away from here as we can. And you find out it was kind of a sweet spot, so you kind of wanted to stay there. I mean, these motherfuckers had their own softball team. It was crazy how the officers protected these fucking pedophiles. They also had what they called a step-down unit, which had a lot of psych patients. There, I actually lived with the alleged serial killer Larry Hall. I got a job in that unit also as an inmate companion, and I had to live on the unit. And I was assigned to certain inmates who couldn't really take care of themselves. So I helped them get in the shower, clean their rooms, shit like that. That was later on down the road. So when I first get to Butner, we're only in there for about maybe 2 hours at like R&D because there's only 4 of us. So they ship us to our units. So I go into my unit, and I got a little Italian in me, and I guess I looked the part. And even though I'm from Ohio, some people say, man, you sound like you're from Jersey or New York or something like that. I guess because I say coffee and sausage, shit like that. So they come up to me and they tell me some of the Italians on the compound. They say, Joey Testa's here. He was in the DeMeo crew, one of the Gemini twins. And then they say, Carmine Persico is here, the Columbo family boss. So I kind of know of all these people and shit like that. So I go to lunch, and everybody comes up to greet me. And there's this old Italian guy. His name was Toothpick. He was a bookie. And my dad was a bookie as I was growing up. So we had a lot to talk about and laugh. He was a nice old guy. Always had a plastic toothpick in his mouth. Really friendly. He says, hey, after dinner tonight, come out to rec. All of us are at the bocce courts. I go, okay, I'll come out. So after dinner, I go out to rec, and Toothpick sees me, and he waves me over to the picnic table, and I meet Joey Testa, shake his hand, and everything was fine. He seemed like a nice guy. I mean, I know he was a killer, but he was friendly. So then we're sitting there, and Toothpick goes, well, do you want to meet the boss? I said, I guess. So there's this old guy tending the flower garden around the officer's shack outside at rec. So Toothpick takes me over there, and he goes, hey there, Carmine. Got somebody I want you to meet. It's Jimmy. And Carmine turns around. Now, as a kid, I had a really bad stutter. I mean, it was really bad. As I got older, I kind of learned to avoid certain words that I knew was going to cause me to stutter so I could change things. Reading out loud in school was a bitch because, of course, you can't change words there. But I dealt with it, and it's a part of me. But I kind of mastered it to where it didn't come out much, only if I was really, really nervous. Well, this was a time I was really, really nervous. I mean, I'm fucking shitting my pants. I'm shaking. My knees are knocking. My hands are shaking. My ass cheeks are flapping together. I'm just scared shitless. So Carmine reaches out his hand and he goes, "What's up, Jimmy? What are you in for?" And I just start stuttering. I go, bank robbery. And he laughs and he goes, "Jesus, I hope you used a note." So we had a good laugh about that. And he goes, "I'll talk to you later." So I start to walk away with toothpick and he looks at me and goes, "Hey, he must really like you." And I said, "Why?" He says, "He don't normally joke with people like that." And I said, "Well, I'm likable. What the hell?" So that next day, I'm not assigned a job or anything. So after lunch, I go out to rec. I was going to walk the track and I see Carmine at his garden. He sees me and he kind of waves me over. So I go over there and we're kind of talking a little bit. And he goes, "Hey, you shop commissary?" I said, "Well, I don't really have any money." I said, "I don't have anybody on the street. They all kind of abandoned me with my crime. So I'm kind of on my own. I got to wait till I get a job." He goes, "Well, at the commissary, they sell fruit and vegetables." Well, they had tomatoes, green peppers, onions, jalapeno peppers, and then you could actually buy them, but there was a limit of only like two per person. And they had loaves of bread they sold and boxes of spaghetti. And I mean, it was almost like a grocery store. So he says, "Hey, how about if I put a little money on your account? You get the vegetables for me, and then anything left over, get what you need." And I go, "Okay." So he kind of looks at the khaki uniform and gets his little pad out and he writes down my name and my number. That evening, I checked my account. I got $100 on my account. So I'm kind of looking at the commissary sheet, and all the vegetables and the bread and stuff only comes up to like maybe 15, $16. So I go out to rec and I say, "Hey, this is only about $16. What else you want me to get you?" He goes, "That's all I want." I go, "Well, there's like $80 left." He said, "Get what you need." So any of you in the federal prison system know that to watch TV, you got to have a radio and headphones, right? And those are expensive on the commissary, but you can always buy them off of other guys on the compound cheaper. So I got my hygiene items. I bought a radio, and I mean, I was just so happy that I was actually able to start off the prison sentence with some stuff. I thought I was very, very nice of him. And I always heard all these stories that, he was Carmine the Snake and stuff like that. And you read about him, but he just seemed like a really nice guy. I mean, I know who he was and I know all he was accused of and all he did. But to me, he was just a friendly guy. So I went out that evening, took him his stuff. He said thank you. And we sat down at the picnic table. He called Toothpick over. He said, "Hey, you play pinochle?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, let's play three hand." So we sitting there playing, and he kind of looks at me and he goes, "So, how'd they catch you anyway?" I said, "Well, on my motion of discovery, they got me. And what the FBI agents told me was that my wife turned me in." And he got this look on his face and he go, "What?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, we had a bad marriage and I traveled a lot and I quit my job stupidly. So I told her I was running drugs and she was fine with it because, we didn't really get along. She wanted to be a stay-at-home mom so I could provide. But the bad part is I had a stripper girlfriend up north and she was pretty much everything that my wife wasn't. But I had three little boys at home, 4 years old, 2 years old, and a newborn. So I was providing for them, but I was living with the stripper while I was robbing banks. So I said after my third bank, I got over $360,000. I gave her $200,000 and she put it in a safe. And my goal was to put $1 million in that safe. And then I was going to hit one more bank and I was going to disappear. But I was wanting to make sure that my kids were taken care of. Because I knew once I was stupid enough to do that first bank, there was no turning back. And I didn't want to get arrested at home in front of my kids. So that's what I did. But after the third bank robbery, she found out about the stripper girlfriend. So she calls the FBI, I hear, and says, I think my husband's doing something wrong. He just gave me $200,000. So all the feds go out to her house. They got the bank robbery money. They got pictures of me because in my bank robberies, I didn't wear a disguise because I was never in trouble. And in the area I was robbing the banks, nobody knew me. Plus, my whole MO was I was going to be that last customer in the bank, to where I go up to the door about 4:58 and there's a girl, a teller sitting there waiting, and she lets me in, and then she locks the door and pulls the shade down. So it's just me and the bank employees. So I pull out the gun, I take them all back into the safe room, empty the safe into a bag I had in my back, tell them to count to 100. I walk to the front door, and the keys are sitting there dangling in the lock. So I unlock it, I walk out, and I'm gone. Perfect. However, now they had pictures of me and they show her, and she said, yeah, that's him. So now they got the name to go with the face. So I'm down in Florida because after the second one, I was like, I got to get away for a couple weeks. So I call home to check on my boys, and she don't answer all day. Finally, about 10 o'clock at night, she answers and goes, it's all over, Jim. You're robbing banks. We know it. The FBI's here. I said, see ya. And I just take off. I got about $160,000 in a duffel bag with me. So I'm like, okay, I got to disappear. And, I'm kind of paranoid. I'm on the run for about 11 days. Don't really have a plan. So I'm just heading out west. But she keeps calling me and talking to me on my cell phone. And this was back in 2002, when cell phones were kind of new. And then she'd call and she'd put my oldest son, Chase, who at the time was 4, on the phone to talk to Daddy. And of course, I was so heartbroken about my boys because I loved them so much. But while they're calling and talking to me, the FBI is tracing the phone calls and they're tracking me across the country. So I told Carmine, that's where I got caught, For some stupid reason, I wanted to go see the Grand Canyon before I went to prison or before I went to wherever I was going. And that's a story in itself, I'll tell. But so I said, she told on me. And he was pissed. He looked at me and goes, that bitch got to go, Jimmy. And I said, what do you mean? He says, that bitch got to go. He goes, no woman tells on their husband and calls the FBI on him, especially when he's giving her money. I don't care how many strippers you're banging. She had no right to call the FBI. And then to use your little boy to call you and track you across the country, that bitch got to go. I said, whoa, Carmine, I think he's joking. He's dead fucking serious. He wants to have this girl whacked. And I'm like, look, she wasn't the best wife, and I probably wasn't the best husband, but she's a wonderful mother. Those kids are first. Even though she's a money-hungry bitch, she always takes care of those boys first. And I'm not there. She's got a live-in boyfriend who's their dad now. I said, they already don't have me. I don't want them to not have her. And he kind of cocks his head and he kind of stares at me for a couple minutes. And I'm just kind of looking back at him. And he goes, okay. But when that youngest turned 18, the bitch is gone. And I just laughed. I said, okay, we'll see. About a week later, I go out to rec in the evening. He's sitting at the table with a toothpick. They call me over to play pinochle. And he reaches down in his bag. He pulls out an envelope and he sets it in front of me. I open the envelope and there's pictures. I'm looking. It's my fucking wife with her boyfriend who I've never seen. And then there's pictures of this house that she lives in. And he looks at me and he goes, just in case you change your mind. I said, no. I said, let it go, please. So that's how he was with me. And he would always try to teach me things. Like he took me under his wing, you could say. And he'd always cook on Sundays. He'd make pasta or something. And he'd always send a bowl to me. And then one day he comes up to me and goes, "Hey, you want to make some money?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well, how would you like to do our laundry?" There was like four of us. He goes, "If you do a good job, you can do all four of us. We'll take care of you." And I go, "Okay." He said, "Only the khaki uniforms. We'll take care of our whites and shit. You just do all the khaki uniforms and you iron them real good." He goes, "I like the creases, one down each side of my shirt." He goes, "I like the collar creased, and I like the big creases in the pants, in the front and in the back." I said, "Okay." He said, "If you do a good job, you do all of us." So I washed his uniform, and I'm not shitting you. I took about an hour ironing this guy's clothes. I put him on a coat hanger, and I walk him over to his unit. He comes out. He takes the hanger. He kind of looks at it, spins it around, and he goes, "Jesus fucking Christ, I never saw creases like this in my life. You're Jimmy the fucking Crease. That's your name, Jimmy the fucking Crease." He goes, "And you know, if you got the in your nickname, you're pretty special." So that's why I'm Jimmy the Crease. And it followed me all through all my prison bid. So that next evening, I go out to rec and I see Toothpick, and we start taking a couple of laps around the track. And he says, "So, how you getting along here?" I said, "Oh, I like it, you know. Some of the guys are good." He goes, "You just stick with us. You don't fuck with any of those other shitwads." He always called people a shitwad. Or he goes, "We got a lot of the gays here. You don't fuck with the gays either." I go, "Hey, okay, okay." So we're kind of walking, and I just asked him, I said, "Hey, why does Carmine like me?" I said, "He doesn't talk to anybody. I see everybody say, 'Hey, Mr. Persico, hey,' and he just nods and stuff like that." He goes, "Well," he goes, "I don't know." He goes, "You know, he isn't around his son. Maybe he kind of looks at you as that like type of person." He goes, "And I'll tell you this, he checked you out." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, you know, he called home, gave him your information, and they checked you out." And he says to me one night, he goes, "Toothpick," he goes, "You know what that fucking kid did? You know how much fucking money that kid got out of the bank? He's got fucking balls so big, I don't know how he puts them in his pants." He goes, "That kid would have been a earner if he was with me." He says, "I cannot believe." He goes, "I never heard of a bank robber getting over 360,000 by themselves." So I said, "Well, you know, I was stupid enough to do it." So he liked that. He also liked the fact that I did look alone. So, you know, there was no chance of me being a rat. I had nobody to tell on, not that I would have anyway. So that's kind of how it was. So he always treated me really good. And there's just so many stories about Carmine. I did see the mean side of him one time. There was a sex offender program, I told you, where all these sex offenders lived on the same unit. And I guess it was a program that George W. Bush implemented, where they wanted to find out how sex offenders went from being like a computer crime to actually turning into a hands-on pedophile. And that's what these people were. They were hands-on pedophiles. I mean, total pieces of shit. You didn't fuck with them. They didn't fuck with you. They were very respectful. And like I said, I couldn't even believe they had their own fucking softball team. I mean, talk about Chomo softball, right? So anyway, so I got a job in the prison factory in Unicor. And I'm in there working, and I kind of get along with everybody. You know, I got an easygoing thing about me. And there's this one cool guard that worked in there, and he'd always come to me. He was a Notre Dame fan. I'm a Notre Dame fan. We'd talk about that with the guys, and he had, you know, pictures in his wallet of his son. He was a baseball player. And I told him, you know, I got boys. And I said, and my son, I think he's starting t-ball or baseball or something like that. I didn't really talk to my wife that much. But a couple weeks later, I got pictures in the mail. Every now and then, my wife would send me pictures of my boys, and it was of my son Chase playing baseball. So I was so proud, you know. It's like I got pictures of my kid, you know. So I took him into work. I'm showing the guys I work with, and that guard comes over. I show him pictures of my boys and stuff like that, and I don't notice anybody else around. So after work, we're kind of walking out of Unicorn, and we go past the checkpoint, and I hear, "Hey there, Jimmy." I turn around, and it's this pedophile that works in there, and I go, "What the fuck?" He goes, "Hey, I know you don't have a lot of money, but if you ever want to sell those, there's some guys in the unit that would pay for them." And I mean, back then I was a stocky dude. I was about 220 pounds. I'm not the fat piece of shit you see before you right now. I fucking grabbed that pedophile by the neck and I threw him against the wall. And I'm like, "You ever fucking say anything about my kids, I swear to God, I'll fucking kill you right there." So everybody grabs me and pulls me off of him and everything. And I'm just heated. So I go back to the unit. We had count, and I go to dinner. And Toothpick comes up to me at dinner. He goes, "Hey, the boss wants to see you out at rec right away." I go, "Okay." So I walk up there, and I can see the look on his face. He's mad. And I go, "Hey," and he goes, "What the fuck are you thinking?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You think I wouldn't hear about the fucking pedophile?" He goes, "What the fuck are you thinking putting hands on him?" I said, "Well, this is what he did." He goes, "I don't give a fuck what he did." He said, "They told you they'll charge you for a hate crime. They told you they'll ship you out of here. You want to blow everything you got just for some piece of shit? You come to me, and I'll take care of the fucking matter. You don't do it yourself, ever." I'm like, "Okay, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm being scolded, and I was wrong, so I apologize." So a couple days later in Unicorn, I'm not the type to call people things, but there was a black guy in there, and he just got there from the pen. And what I understand is he didn't like the mediums. He liked the pen mentality. He liked the more respect in the pen and stuff like that. And he just did not like being on this compound. He didn't like the pedophiles. He didn't like how it was ran, and he wanted to get out of here. So in the morning, he walks in there, and I saw it happen, and I couldn't fucking believe it. But he had like a brown cloth glove on that they give the yard workers. And I guess he had a razor blade in his middle finger. And he walks up to this pedophile who said that shit to me. And he fucking goes like that. And this dude's face just lays open. I mean, it's like you cut a fish at the belly. I mean, he cut the guy from temple to fucking mouth. I mean, it was cut so deep, there wasn't even that much blood. That's how it just opened up. And then the guards are, tackling the guy and shit like that. And, they fucking take the fucking pedophile up to medical, and they got to, stitch his face. And I'm like, holy shit. So I go out to rec that night, and I tell Carmine what happened. He goes, "Huh, but that guy's always going to have a reminder, isn't he?" And I found out later, Carmine never told me, but I found out later that Carmine paid this guy $500 to do that to the pedophile, because the guy knew he'd get shipped. He was doing life, so it didn't matter if he got a hate crime, and he'd be sent back to the pen, and he made $500 for it. And at that time, I kind of learned what kind of friend I had in Carmine. I mean, you might think it's bad, and you might think he's a bad person, but to me, he was nothing but good. And there was another time when every now and then I would call my boys, to talk to them. And one time I called, and my ex-wife says to me, "Chase is uncomfortable talking to you." And I said, "Why?" She says, "Well, I got a live-in boyfriend, and he's uncomfortable talking to you with him here. So could you kind of not call?" And I'm just like heartbroken. So that night I go out to rec, and like Carmine sees me, I'm just not myself. And he goes, "What's the matter with you?" And I tell him, I said, "I can't call my kids. He's uncomfortable talking to me. At least that's what my wife says." And I said, "I just love him so much." And Carmine looks at me, and he shakes his head. And he goes, "Did you love your kids so much when you was fucking that stripper?" And I looked at him. He said, Did you fucking love those kids so much when you started robbing banks? Did you love those kids so much when you knew you was going to go to prison for a long time? He goes, don't talk to me about loving those kids. He goes, I know you love those kids, but you calling them is just for you, and that's selfish. Let them little boys have a childhood. You say they got a man who's there as their dad. You say they got a good mom. Let those boys have a childhood. They need to grow up, enjoy themselves, and not have to worry about some dad in prison. And he kind of gave me something to kind of think of. He says, what you do is you send them birthday cards, you send them Christmas cards. Every now and then you drop them a letter. And it's up to her if she gives it to them or not. But then you can always say that you actually tried. And I said, that's a good idea, and he gave me a lot of advice like that. And he helped me through the early bit of my prison sentence when I had nobody on the streets. And, that's what happens in prison, where people don't understand a lot, that when you go to prison for a long time and you're around so many people, they become kind of like your family, and they're always there for you. Now, a lot of those people, they have people out on the street and stuff like that, but if you don't have anybody, that's your family in prison. I mean, you meet some really good guys there, and Carmine was a really good guy to me. No matter what anybody says about him, I will always hold him in the utmost respect and love because of all he did for me. And I'm not talking about the financial spot. In prison, I was talking about, the clothes situation, doing their laundry. If anybody understands prison, all the money in prison is postage stamps, right? That's what you gamble with. That's what you buy shit from the store guy with. That's what you might buy a radio with. You might pay 3 books of stamps for it. And, back then, stamps were only, I think, maybe 39 cents. So you could go to the commissary and buy a book, but you could go to somebody on the compound and get a book of stamps for $5. And it might have 33s in it or 36-cent stamps. And they wasn't good for anything except buying and selling shit, You could use them to mail, but a lot of them, you couldn't even peel the back off of them. So it was like you had monopoly money. So most laundry guys, when they would do somebody's laundry for a month, they might get a book or 2 books of stamps a month. Carmine paid me $50 a month to do his clothes. And the other 3 people paid me $50 a month just to do their clothes. And I knew it was his way of taking care of me, because he'd always ask me, do you need anything? You good? And I would never say, hey, I need this or I need that, because I'm not that type of guy, I mean, I just would never ask for anything. And I know that was his way of making sure I was taken care of, because he respected the fact that I wasn't going to always ask for shit. And I just hold him like that. I mean, when I found out he passed away, it just broke my heart. And, it was like my dad. My dad died when I was younger. And I kind of held him in that kind of regard. And it really upset me when he passed away. And I'll always think fondly of Carmine and how he treated me, and more importantly, how he helped me do my time. And I left FCI Butner in 2009. And I got out of prison in 2015. And, I'd write Carmine on like core links and stuff like that. And then I went back to prison. I did 18 months in the state for having a weapon under disability. When I got out, he wasn't happy that I went back to prison. And then I just felt I didn't belong in the world anymore. I was so unhappy. My kids didn't want anything to do with me because I went back to prison. I felt alone. And I actually thought I was happier in prison. So I fucking go to the bank I bank at, and I rob the teller. And then that following Monday, I go to my PO knowing I'm going to be arrested. So I basically robbed the bank to go back to prison on purpose. What a fucking stupid idea that was. And I did 7 more years in the feds, and it just wasn't the same prison I left. There was no Carmines in it, and there was no good Italian people in it. And I just kind of look at it like those were the good old days, even though everybody says club fed. It wasn't club fed. I mean, there was a camp that was like that, but that's where they put, like, congressmen and people like that. I mean, state prison is so much better than the feds because you can have a TV at your bunk, you can get food boxes. Fuck, I was there. They had fundraisers. They were eating McDonald's and shit. The feds, you can't have nothing. I mean, you got a little radio and then you watch TV through that, and you got to go to TV rooms. And, the only good thing about the feds is the food they serve is better, the jobs pay more, and it used to be the people you was around, but not anymore. So that's my couple stories about Carmine. I hope maybe that'll kind of shed a little different light to some people who think bad of him. And I'm sure you have your reasons. Everybody does. But like I said, it's a little deeper than that. All right. Tune in again to Crease's Corner. Crease out.